In today's video, we're taking a look at the latest offseason trade talk involving teams like the Buffalo Sabres. Buffalo could be a very busy team with multiple first-round picks and some eyes on improving for next year. They could be making several moves that we'll discuss here. Plus, we have a look at the Vancouver Canucks situation and what they might be doing, obviously trying to find some cap space, and they have to sign some key players as well. We might have a suspension for Evgeni Malkin. We have some signings, injury updates, and more, and that's coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of NHL news and rumors to talk about today. Let's get started with the Evgeni Malkin situation, who's going to be having a hearing. This actually might even be, determined what his suspension is going to be, because there should be one before this makes it to YouTube. So if that happens, check the pinned comment down below to get the results. I'm suspecting he's probably going to get 1 or 2 games is my thinking here. Basically what happened was he is having a hearing for cross-checking Mark Borowiecki of the Predators right to the face. Now, if you take a look at the Austin Matthews situation back from earlier this season, he was given a 2-game suspension. Very similar situation. He basically cross-checked down, of course, a little bit different because he got like the back, but still, like, same idea. Cross-checked. It was with force. There was no ride up. It's not like he hit the shoulders and it came up or anything like that. Very similar circumstance. He had no prior rap sheet. Malkin's not completely clean from the past, but he's not exactly a repeat offender either. So certainly I would suspect a comparable outcome, I think, is a fair assumption to make. So we'll see, but I'm going to assume he's probably going to get 2 games like Matthews did, and we'll update the pinned comment down below. Let me know what you think on that situation. Should he be suspended? What do you think is a fair outcome? Now, the Arizona Coyotes have signed prospect Nathan Smith to a 2-year entry-level contract. Nathan Smith was originally drafted back in 2018 in the 3rd round by the Winnipeg Jets. Never signed with them and has been playing college hockey. He's been playing with Minnesota State University. The center iceman has opted to sign with the Coyotes as a free agent on the 2-year deal. So we'll see how this goes. I mean, clearly the Coyotes are trying to stockpile young players to help with this rebuild, so I would imagine he'll be given a pretty decent opportunity in that regard. Another signing today involves the LA Kings, who signed Francesco Pinelli, who gets a 3-year ELC. He was a 2021 second-round pick, and the LA Kings also looks like they might have to wait a little bit longer on one of their top defensive prospects, Brock Faber, who's reportedly heading back to Minnesota for his junior year of college. So certainly I would imagine from his perspective, he's looking at this as an opportunity where he has unfinished business, looking to win a national championship if he can, of course. And of course, he's probably looking at the Kings and their depth charts and the amount of prospects he's got to deal with, and is probably just as good for his development to continue in college. So that one will have to wait. I know we've seen a lot of college signings here in recent days, and there's certainly a number of players that we're waiting on. I know Matthew Nyes is another one in Toronto getting a lot of attention. I know Elliot Friedman made mention today in the 32 Thoughts podcast that he believes that the Leafs and Nyes will be meeting, I think he said Tuesday or Wednesday is what's expected. But right now, all indications are that he's more than likely heading back to school next year and will forego signing his pro contract here for a little bit longer. Now on to some injury updates. The Leafs also without Ondrej Kase for some time. We finally get confirmation that he is indeed dealing with a concussion. So we know that he has a history of this, which is terrible news to find out. I mean, I kind of suspected that was the case where he had been out with an upper body injury, and based on watching the play happen, which I believe resulted in the injury, it's kind of what we thought was going on. So certainly that's not great news, and hopefully he can recover at this point. As much as you want to see him come back and help the Maple Leafs in either regular season or playoffs, you have to think first about his health, and hopefully he can make a good recovery so that his quality of life is still pretty solid, because he's had a number of these in his young NHL career. We also got word that Mark Scheifele and Blake Wheeler are both doubtful for tonight's game against the Montreal Canadiens. In fact, I believe it's been confirmed Scheifele 100% isn't going to play. Of course, they played the Ottawa Senators yesterday, and Scheifele got hurt. Looks like a pretty significant shoulder injury is what I'm guessing it is. We haven't really heard a lot from the team. Essentially, Scheifele was coming out of the defensive zone up along the wall and get hit pretty hard by Senators' fourth line player Parker Kelly. I know I've seen a lot of Habs fans giving it to Scheifele on social media today. Of course, there's still some saltiness from the Jake Evans injury from the playoff series back before, saying that Scheifele needs to keep his head up, because I know he did make comments about Evans when he was talking with that situation, saying that Evans needed to keep his head up. And to be honest, I don't think that's the situation at all. I've seen it numerous times today on social media. It's like, for one, that was a while back now. I would hope that you guys would be moving past that. And secondly, Scheifele's head wasn't down. If you watch the play closely, Scheifele's head was up. He saw him coming, but there was just absolutely no way out of the situation. The hit came, and you don't always expect to get hurt on those kind of hits. You see them all the time, and players are just fine. It's just one of those things that just the way they collided with the shoulder, that Scheifele went immediately off the ice in a lot of pain and discomfort, and it looked bad. To me, with the number of games left in the regular season, especially the fact that Wheeler's out too, I know they won last night against Ottawa, and it was a 4-3 really close, tight game, but they're pretty much out of the race. I don't see how they can actually get in the playoffs. I know mathematically it's not impossible, but they need to win every single game and have help, which is pretty much impossible. To me, I think they need to make sure to just kind of accept the fact here that it's probably over, and hopefully these guys can begin healing and be back for next season or whatever they're going to do. We know Winnipeg's going to be a very interesting team to watch. They have some big decisions to make. This is not a season that's gone well for them. And after, like I said, a few years back being in the Western Conference Final, the team has slowly been declining ever since. And they need some tough decisions and tough moves to possibly be made this summer. So it'll be interesting to see how they proceed there. But Scheifele's out. No timetable yet. Wheeler not expected to play tonight either, and that's going to be cause for concern for Winnipeg. They might be able to win against Montreal. They played the bulk of last night's game, of course, without the same guys, but we'll see where it goes. They still have some good guys that can score, like Kyle Connor and Dubois and Ehlers, etc. But with Hellebuyck playing last night, I kind of wonder. I haven't seen the confirmation of who's in goal tonight for the Jets, but I would think Hellebuck's probably going again. They're likely going to run him out of steam as well, which is also a problem in my opinion here longer term. Now, speaking of injuries, apparently Mark Stone is ready to come back, and Peter DeBoer, coach of the Golden Knights, is calling his return to tomorrow's game a game-time decision. So obviously he's been out for some time dealing with some back issues. The tricky part here is how can they get the space to get him into the lineup is a tough part. They do have a number of players on long-term injury reserve outside of Stone. Apparently they've added some more, which was required to activate Max Pacioretty, which I believe was Haig and Howden. And apparently there's a few guys more again that are on IR that can be moved to LTIR to create the necessary space, is what I'm being told, what I've seen online, but it's still really tight. But obviously they have the players that are injured that they can technically do it. But if they activate Stone, I'm not sure how any of those other guys are going to be able to come back before the end of the regular season unless somebody else goes down with injury. It's such a tight a way for them to operate. But at this rate, the way they've been going, I mean, they've been playing better. They've been getting good help with a team like LA and Dallas not winning all the time in front of them either. And I think they can sneak themselves into the playoffs. And obviously having Mark Stone is going to be a big help. So we'll see where that goes. It's going to be interesting to see how they operate with their roster before they get to the playoffs, where there is no cap. Now, of course, as we mentioned onto the rumor side of the video today, we're going to look at Vancouver and Buffalo. When it comes to the Canucks, we know there's several options that they're taking a look at. I did come across a very interesting article looking at the Canucks today. Of course, it's widely suspected between Connor Garland, JT Miller, and Brock Besser. Good chance at least one of those guys gets moved. Now, to me, I think there's a good chance that Garland makes the most sense, but at the same time, you have the argument that he's coming off a down season and he wouldn't be really trading from a position of strength. Because of that, values down might not be the wisest move. You get JT Miller, of course, who's the most valuable piece, who if they did trade him, they could probably get a really good return. But of course, they might want to extend him. So to me, the most likely scenarios, they have those extension conversations as soon as they're able to. And depending on how things are looking for working out a contract extension will determine if he gets signed or gets dealt. to me, that's likely the scenario. When it comes to Brock Boeser, it's just quite simple. They can't afford to sign him to that qualifying offer of $7.5 million. But there is a process here for the Vancouver Canucks. Now, you see, it's not just Boeser. It's a common trend with a lot of these younger RFAs wanting the bigger money sooner than later. At one point, players had to wait until they were UFA eligible to get that big dough, and now they don't do that. The top guys that are playing well coming out of their ELCs, they basically have it's like their market is shifted to them getting more of the money sooner. So a lot of these guys are getting like 3-year bridge deals, but sometimes 2 years, but they're backloaded, and the final year of the contracts, which determines the qualifying offer, is at a much higher rate, so they're guaranteed to be offered at least that on their next deal. So it's a way for them to kind of put pressure on the team. But the team does have some recourse. The article that we talked about here today that I was reading kind of outlined this is not something you see a lot. And the Canucks have done this before, though. It's kind of what you would refer to as sort of like reverse arbitration, if you will. Now, the team can go to file for salary arbitration, but in the case of this, they don't always file because they can't come to terms on a new deal. They can file because they can't or don't feel like the qualifying offer is justifiable based on the performance of the player. So they can file for arbitration to reduce the salary, and it can go down to 85% of the existing salary. So where he's making or expected to make 7.5 on his qualifying offer, that would take it down to 6.375. So it shaves 15% off of his income. So of course, in that case, like a lot of times with arbitration, teams and players and agents, etc., will have their negotiations, their contracts sorted out and come to an agreement on their own before they ever reach the arbitrator. A high percentage of those cases do end up solved and resolved that way, and that very well could be the case as well. It's fair to say, and I would hope Boeser's agent and himself can clearly admit that he's not valued at $7.5 million based on how he's played this year. And if they can't come to terms before they have to hit those dates where things have to be filed, then that might be an option for them. I think they would consider Boeser at 6.3 way faster than they would at 7.5. I mean, that's a pretty substantial difference, but at the same time, if all else fails, depending on how those negotiations go, there is always the possibility of a trade. I don't know which one they're going to do. To me, Boeser or Miller have way more value than Garland. But a lot of this is going to revolve around negotiations and those contracts too, I think. But who they move, it's still up, an unknown. Hard to say. But these negotiations are going to play a big role of it. And like I said, they did the same thing with Mason Raymond, like around 10, 12 years ago, I think it was. And they could do the same thing here with Brock Boeser. It's not something you see very much, but it could become something we see more common here, as this has been the common contract structure with these young RFAs wanting the big money up front. They don't always live up to the hype, and when they don't play up to that level, teams have to have recourse too, and that's why that option is there. Now, on to the Buffalo Sabres. Now, of course, the Buffalo Sabres are a team that, obviously look better this year. Certainly have a lot of room to grow, though, before they can be considered, out of the rebuild and be considered playoff contenders. That's certainly, like I said, it's not happening tomorrow, but they have a lot of good pieces in place. We're expected to see the NHL debut of the first overall pick, Owen Power, coming up here this week against the Toronto Maple Leafs. So that's coming very shortly. I believe that's tomorrow night. So that's going to be very interesting to watch. Of course, they've got some other good young players on that team making good strides this year as well. I mean, we saw a big coming out party for Tage Thompson, a little bit longer than it was expected, but it happened, which is the main thing. You got Cousins, you got Krebs, you got Jack Quinn on the way. Of course, you got Dahlin, you got Power in the back end. You got some interesting goalie prospects still in college hockey. They've got a lot of things to be excited about, and they're going to continue to do that. But you have to think that there's a possibility here that the Buffalo Sabres might try to insulate those young players with some stronger veterans to really make some big improvements this year. They have multiple first-round picks. Of course, they picked up first-rounders in the Vegas trade with Eichel. They picked up first-round picks from Florida in the Reinhart trade, plus they have their own. You have to think there's a real chance that at least one of those picks gets dealt. And could it be involved for a pretty substantial young player, or could it maybe even be involved in a bigger package for a really substantial player? It's hard to say which route they go. Of course, the Sabres pick themselves will likely be the highest one here. They're the main ones that are going to be missing the playoffs. Vegas is, possibly in the playoffs, possibly not. Either way, it's probably going to be around middle of the first round somewhere. And then, of course, you have the Panther pick, which is expected to be really late, given that they are expected to have a real shot at some longer-term playoff success. So with all that said, the most likely pick they would move would be the Florida Panther draft choice. There's no doubt about that. But could they look to other teams that don't have first-round picks that would like to get into this draft in the first round and grab themselves a young player after trading away their picks at the deadline, like the teams they were already talking about, like Florida or Vegas? Would they have new conversations with them about maybe reacquiring a pick? That's a possibility. You have to look at teams like Carolina and Chicago and Calgary. They're all in the same boat here as well. Not to mention the Boston Bruins too. So you look at those teams, you see some players that are, expected to likely move. You get Jake DeBrusk, who we know had requested a trade. That could change, but that's how things stand here today. That might be something that Boston would be willing to entertain. I don't know if that's exactly what they would do, but just some food for thought. With Chicago obviously wanting to move guys like Kubalik or Strome, you got maybe the Canes are going to likely need to shed salary. Maybe a guy like Teravainen. There's all these fairly established players that are not like we're looking at like mid to late still mid-20s sort of basically, that are still young enough to be a part of this group in Buffalo that could have a big impact. So that would not be shocking at all. But there was a lot of this information that we're talking about from Buffalo comes from a John Vogel mailbag article in The Athletic. And one of the other questions he was also asked about was, of course, the possibility of bringing home hometown player Patrick Kane from Chicago, who we know Kane and Taves very well could move this summer. Of course, they're going to have all the say in the world on whether or not that happens, since they have no move clauses. That it will be entirely up to them if they want to accept it, and where they go will be their call. Considering that he's down to 1 year left on his contract at $10.5 million, even if the Hawks were to retain salary to get that number down to a more manageable level, still, the price tag would be fairly high for Buffalo, and it may not make any sense. They might be better off to wait until he becomes a free agent and see if he'd be interested in signing and come to his hometown team. Clearly, this is a team could be a few veterans away from being a lot more competitive, and he would certainly make a huge difference. But if they wanted to consider a trade with Chicago, you're probably looking at maybe two of those first-round picks that they have. Probably looking at a guy like, a good prospect in there, maybe Victor Olofsson or, one of their younger players that might interest Chicago. Like, you're probably looking at a good 4 pieces for Kane, and that might be not really something that makes sense for Buffalo at this point in the juncture of their rebuild. I mean, getting him as a UFA, you don't give up anything, right? So maybe wait a year, see if you can bring him home that way. Probably makes more sense. So according to Vogel, that was kind of his take is, I guess, you can never say never, of course, but at the same time, it's going to be an expensive venture if they go down that road, and I just don't know that they would want to. But could he get there eventually? It wouldn't be completely shocking if he, decided to sign and finish out his career as a Sabre and try to help bring them back to a more prominent level in the NHL. So let me know your thoughts on Patrick Kane eventually ending up in Buffalo. Do you see that something that could possibly happen? Let me know your thoughts as well as everything else discussed here today down in the comments, and we'll discuss further. If you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.